Hello, and welcome to my presentation about soil salinization and the effect it has on crop growth and the environment. So, how are saline soils actually created? Here in this presentation I want to focus on secondary salinization. This is mainly created by us humans when we use low quality irrigation water. It also gets worse when we have very poor drainage on our soils. In turn, this will actually result in very high saline soils, and it can also lead to sodic soils with a high exchangeable sodium percentage. This causes actually the soil to aggregate and decrease the hydraulic conductivity. So we'll actually lose the performance of water to flow and enter our soils. This can in turn, of course, make it hard for roots to take up the water due to the low osmotic difference and the poor volumetric water content due to the soil aggregation. That can mainly happen in sodic soils. Also, toxic salt levels in plant tissue and apex can in turn happen. This will of course stunt plant growth and will have poor yields as a result. So how are we currently growing plants? At this moment we're actually using very low quality water, which contains a lot of sodium salts. Also, combined with this, we have a poor drainage system. This actually results that the salts will remain in the soil while the water is taken up by the plants. This in turn leads to actually a salt level increase in our soil. And short term, this will be resulting that plants are less productive, so we'll have actually a lower yield than we would in a normal soil environment. But in the long term, this soil will actually become unbearable for plants to grow in, because it actually will get too much salts in the soil, and the soil will actually aggregate and will be toxic for the plants. Right now there are some blockages that are preventing better soil practices. These are mainly that there is no urgency. This is also for the government that there is no urgency, but mainly for the growers. There is no hard policy at the moment that will actually improve our soil practices. Another thing is that we have limited funding for research on salt tolerance and measures. If we have a better funding for this research, we can actually come up with better ways of practicing our soil. And then, of course, lastly, we have the short-sightedness of farmers. They just want to earn money and provide for their family, like all humans do. But they will, of course, make decisions that will in turn lead for better yield, but not necessarily better soil. There are currently some drivers for the better soil practices. These are the growing awareness of these sodic soils, but also the cost-benefit analysis of better soil practices. So eventually, if you actually invest in your soil, you make it better, you will actually get better yields out of them and, of course, healthier plants. Another thing is that we have a long-term strategy vision of farmers and also that of stakeholders. Another thing is that we have Sustainable Development Goals number 2, meaning the zero hunger, and also number 13 and 15. They're the climate action and also the life on land. They are actually good drivers to make sure that we are better handling our soils and actually provide for a better, healthy world. Now I would like to enlighten you with some easy soil practices to improve our soil condition. The first thing is we can actually use phytoremediation. This means that we'll be growing crops that actually are able to uptake all the salts and sodium from the soil and store it into the biomass. This we can actually remove from the land, and then we'll actually be removing a lot of the salts inside the soil. Another thing is we can get a subsurface drainage system. This will drain the water out of the field with bellows and thus removing salts by better drainage. We can also coat the pipes of the subsurface drainage system with sand and iron oxide since that will actually also bind phosphorus. Phosphorus we actually also would like to not leak into nature because that can lead to eutrophication. Another thing we can do is growing salt-tolerant species. If we grow salt-tolerant species, we can actually grow in the higher salt concentration of these soils. This can be achieved by breeding. Another thing we can do is apply gypsum. If we apply gypsum to saline soils, it will actually release the sodium it holds in the cation exchange complex of the soil and exchange it with calcium that comes from the gypsum. The calcium can then be used for plant growth while also improving the soil properties. The last thing we can do is increasing the soil carbon. If we annually apply manure to solid soil, the physical structure can be improved, which results in better crop growth and thus yields. Now I would like to talk about the socioeconomics and policies. Right now I want to focus on Egypt since it's really popular to grow rice near the Nile Delta. Except Egypt suffers about 35% of salinized soils near the Nile due to intensive rice growing. Actually, the rice cultivation has been cut in half in order to save the saline soils in regions where the other crops can be grown apart from the salt-resistant rice. Growing rice actually now requires a cultivation permit from the Ministry of Public Works and Water Resources due to the salinization of the Rhine. Improving saline soils by the government has been achieved by actually installing subsurface drainage system to improve drainage. Another thing that the government actually helped is to improve soil properties by better land management. They actually did land leveling to make sure that there were not any water remaining on the land. Another thing that they did is gypsum amendments, as well as subsoiling. Subsoiling actually is cutting through the topsoil, and that actually improves the water infiltration. Now that you are aware of the issues of saline soils, I would like to ask if you know any growers, governments or stakeholders, and also bring up this issue with them to grow awareness for them. We've already discussed the remedies that we can easily apply to saline soils. These are the subsurface drainage system, applying gypsum, phytoremediation, salt-tolerant plants, as well as increasing soil carbon. Another thing I would like to ask from you is to actually write to the Ministry of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality and convince them to financially promote growers who implement these remedies. This will then in turn promote our soil quality and therefore lead to Soil4Life.